I'm Stephen J. Garvey, founder, leader of National Citizens Alliance, NCA, and NCA PM candidate for 2019. And we're looking forward to the federal election, and we're picking up very good grassroots momentum. Tonight I'm going to talk about direct democracy, and I'm going to comment on the referendum initiated by citizens, RIC, and the CPU, Canadian People's Union. And we're going to make our case that both of these movements should join NCA so we can implement direct democracy from within. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen. And I'm going to present the case tonight, and you decide for yourselves. But if you agree with us, share the message and try and get these people on board. We're very concerned about RIC and CPU, their agenda. We don't know if they've been infiltrated by globalists, but encouraging Canadians not to vote is not the answer, without question. That's only going to perpetuate the globalist status quo. That's what these globalists controlled opposition in Ottawa want. They don't care. They either want you voting for them or not voting at all. So not voting is only perpetuating the status quo. Another thing that's really flawed with these movements is that they say that all political parties are corrupt, and we are living, existing proof that not all political parties are corrupt. We're 100% grassroots, 100% uncontrolled opposition. We are Canada's true populist party. Populist in the sense that we do not adhere to an ideology. We do not adhere to the left-right, the false liberal conservative mechanisms. We operate within the realm of what's in the best interest of our people, our country. Also putting our people, our country first, and a strong, unwavering stance of anti-globalist UN, pro-Canadian. That's who we are at NCA. So we're providing a great opportunity for Canadians to really shake up Ottawa, shake up the entrenched crony corruption in Ottawa that's been going on for decades and decades, all the way back to Confederation. I'm just going to comment on RIC now, a referendum initiated by the citizens. And, you know, I have to say that we support direct democracy, NCA. So overall, we support what these groups are doing, but their approach, in our view, is flawed, misguided, and it will only perpetuate the status quo. The first thing about RIC, you know, they talk about all the decisions being decided by referendum. And then all of a sudden, you know, there would be these stewards, whether they're self-appointed, elected stewards who would govern the country, and everything would be by referendum through the people. And they say that you would need 1% to 3% of the Canadian people to initiate a referendum, and you would need a 70% quorum. Well, I'll be frank, the federal government would basically come to a standstill if this so-called system was ever in place. You know, just attaining the 70% quorum would be a huge feat. And so the government would be completely bogged down. There's big issues with these stewards, like who are they? What decisions are they making? And then there's a disingenuous claim that RIC somehow would end politics. That is completely erroneous. Completely erroneous. Politics would shift. It would center on these so-called stewards, and it would center on manipulating the public whenever they vote on a referendum. So it would be simply a shift in politics. And another important point is this system could never be implemented from the outside. So by telling people not to vote, not get behind parties like NCA, this thing will never come to fruition, ever. You can't change from the outside, barring a revolution like the French Revolution. You can't do it. So this is a non-starter. If we look at CPU, they make a false claim that the crown, quote, the crown belongs to the people. And we've looked into this, and one of our supporters, Jesse, provided us with some really good information on it. But basically, the crown is owned by Canada. The crown owns Canada and its people. The Queen is merely a figurehead, as is the Governor General. They're just figureheads. And the crown actually is a corporation. It establishes its authority over the Canadian people. And your property, the Canadian people's property, and the Canadian people themselves are held in trust. So that's what's going on. And then there's another claim that somehow the Constitution is de facto. And we saw this through the myth of Canada. But the reality is there's an established authority in place, the Crown. And right now, it has authority over the Canadian people. There's no denying that. So the NCA is looking to shake this up. And we're looking to bring change from within, but through a grassroots, uncontrolled vehicle, which is fully connected to the Canadian people. We are the Canadian people. We're an extension of the Canadian people. We're a vehicle of the Canadian people. And I should add further, CPU, again, this thing is borderline absurd because they're claiming, well, let's get 50% plus one of every Canadian from every province to agree to major reform, constitutional reform. Well, that's nearly impossible to get that many people to agree to that. And even if they did agree to it, there's no mechanism within the government structure right now to even accept that. So it's a non-starter as well. So what we're proposing is to get the NCA into power, and we can implement direct democracy, and we can pursue constitutional reform and try to get our own constitution for the Canadian people. We don't have that. So we're encouraging these groups, members of RIC and CPU, and anyone else who thinks Canada is de facto, to join NCA, and so we can actually change from within. And we're very serious about this. Direct democracy is integral to the NCA. And I'm just going to put up our governance reform policy. We actually go further than these groups in our policy. Here it is, NCA governmental reform policy. There's Trudeau. He lied on getting proportional representation. So he's just another one of these career establishment phony politicians. We all know that. But we have 6 major reforms on our website, and there's more of them. This is part of our platform. Citizen-initiated recall of any member of Parliament, including Trudeau. And this will be initiated through the constituency, and the voting would be by the constituent to recall any member of Parliament. That's something we support, and we will legislate upon forming government. We also support citizen-initiated referendum. So this will allow the citizens of Canada to initiate referendums, and these will be binding referendums on any major issue. Any major issue. However, we don't believe there should be referendums on every issue. That is not common sense. That is not reasonable. These referendums are intended for major issues affecting the Canadian people. And there will be a minimum threshold of citizen support and minimum quorum for the referendum vote. The third thing we support is citizen-initiated legislation. So we believe that the Canadian people should have a right to initiate legislation in the Parliament. Also, and I will show through our party constitution, we believe constituents should have a right to initiate legislation through their MP, whereby the MP would create a private member's bill for that particular issue. And assuming that there's enough support in the riding for the issue, plus a quorum on it. The fourth thing we vote is vote of the Canadian people on legislation. We believe that the sovereign authority of the politics should and must rest with the Canadian people, and therefore we support the constituents of a riding overriding an MP in terms of how they vote, and also overriding every single MP in the riding. And we talk about if there's 150,000 members of the Canadian electorate would be required to trigger a national vote on legislation, and they would have 8 months to attain the necessary number of members, and there would be a 50+1 rule in effect on the voting. So this is a way to empower the Canadian people and bypass the MPs in Ottawa and give the Canadian people the final say over legislation. So, there could be a really profound, significant piece of legislation that's being voted on. Let's say M103. So this would allow the Canadian people to actually do the voting on the legislation and bypass these MPs in Ottawa. Another way to empower the Canadian people. Fifth, the NCA will disband the Privy Council, the Queen's Privy Council. The Queen's Privy Council is the main pinnacle of the shadow government deep state in Ottawa. It is unelected, unaccountable. It has major influence over the PM, the cabinet, the judiciary, the RCMP, the Treasury. This is anti-democratic institution in Ottawa. We will disband it. And all these cronies in Ottawa, you name it, are part of that Privy Council. Trudeau, Hassan, Bernier, Harper, Mulcair, Chrétien, Martin, on and on. All these cronies are part of it. These establishment, globalist cronies are part of it. We will disband the Privy Council. This is completely undemocratic institution. So that'll be gone under NCA forming government. Finally, we support a binding national referenda of non-confidence on the PM and or the federal government. And this is 1 year following a federal election, and a 50+1 rule will apply, and the binding vote would be triggered by a petition of at least 6 million members of the Canadian electorate. Again, this is empowering the Canadian people to remove a sitting government rather than having to wait for the next general election. Again, this is all about the Canadian people and empowering them, giving them a say over what's happening to the country, how their tax dollars are being spent, Again, this is another beautiful piece of democratic reform the NCA will implement. Again, I review, we have some beautiful policies here that will do major democratic reform, citizen-initiated recall, citizen-initiated referendum, citizen-initiated legislation, vote of the Canadian people on actual legislation, overriding the MPs in Ottawa, disband the Privy Council, binding national vote of non-confidence on the PM and or federal government, sitting government. And we take this so seriously. These reforms are part of our party constitution. So even if we, to start with, we only have, let's say, 10 MPs in Ottawa, they will be subject to recall by their constituents. There will be citizen-initiated legislation through our MPs. And I will show you this right now. This is in our party constitution under rules of conduct for NC members elected to the House of Commons. We support constituent-initiated recall of an elected NCA member, citizen-guided legislative position through constituent voting. So this will allow the constituent to direct the MP on how to vote on a particular legislation. And we also have in here citizen-initiated legislation. So they can actually implement, propose legislation through the MP. And if there's enough support in the constituent, the MP would be obligated to do a private member's bill and push that legislation in the House of Commons. The only qualification is that it must be consistent with the NCA values, core values, freedom, fairness, and accountability. It must be consistent with those. As long as it is, we will empower the constituents. We will empower the Canadian people. And, we believe in our approach. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than what we have now, which is top-down, autocratic, dictatorial politics out of Ottawa through controlled opposition, through massive misinformation through the globalist mainstream media. And so this is going to be a lot better, because what's happening is globalist interests are dictating to Ottawa. UN entities, globalists, super wealthy globalists are dictating to Ottawa. The globalist sellouts are all rampant right through Ottawa. We all know it. And we want to shake this up. And we want to empower the Canadian people. We want a major shift from the concentration of power in Ottawa to the Canadian people. That's what NCA supports. And if you support our agenda, please support NCA. Become a candidate. Donate to the party, even $5. Volunteer in our ridings in the federal election. You can sign up on our homepage at nationalcitizensalliance.ca. We are Canada's true populist party. 100%. We're 100% grassroots, 100% uncontrolled opposition. We're the only party running in 2019 that will deal with the absolute corruption of the Bank of Canada. We are the only party running in 2019 that will end mass immigration, which is rapidly transforming our country. We're the only party in Canada that will deal with the crooked, corrupt CPP, which is basically stealing money from the Canadian people. And we believe through our CPP policy, we will make most Canadian families millionaires after at least 3 generations. So please take a close look at our policies. They are real, they are powerful, and they are all about the Canadian people. And thank you for joining me. Please share this message.